Welcome, everyone. I have the honor of moderating this panel with four outstanding speakers. I'm going to introduce each one of them. What we're going to do is each of them is going to give a short presentation. If you have questions or are unclear about something during their presentation, invite you to put those in the chat. But we will hold most of the conversation for after all four of them go. So primarily we'll take clarifications. If somebody's confused about something and needs clarification, we'll interrupt for that or do those in between the session, the talks. But we'll run through the four talks, and then I'll have some questions for the panelists, and then we'll open it up to all of you to speak. So we have Dr. Pablo Cornejo, we have Stacey Isaac Berahzer, we have Dr. Jay Garland, and we have Bruce Douglas with us. And so I'm going to start by reading just a very short bio for Dr. Cornejo, and then Pablo, have you take it away, and then I'll do the short bios before each of you speak. Does that sound good, panelists? We're all good with that plan? And that was the order that I named you in the order I believe we agreed you would speak. So we'll go with that. Cool. So Dr. Pablo Cornejo is Associate Professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at Cal State University, Chico. Dr. Cornejo received his PhD in Environmental Engineering from the University of South Florida. His research focuses on the sustainability of water, wastewater, and integrated resource recovery systems, water and sanitation issues in the developing world, and sustainability-based engineering education. So Pablo, take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share some slides with you all. Today, I wanted to speak with you all briefly about some of the work that I've been doing that has obviously an economic component, and this session is all about economics. However, it's interesting the way that economics relates to energy use and chemical use, and how that relates to environmental impacts, and how things like maintenance time and system intrusiveness also have an impact on cost. And so I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about my work related to the C wastewater decision support tool, social, environmental, and economic wastewater decision support tool, which was designed to serve these smaller communities throughout the RCAP network, which is the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And just like to acknowledge the funding source from the EPA through their technical assistance and training program for this work. So as most of you are likely familiar in this community, we have a large number of small wastewater treatment systems serving less than 10,000 population equivalent. And a lot of these are in disadvantaged communities. So that includes, communities in the US-Mexico border, tribal communities, rural parts of the US. And this may range from, an average of around 2,000 to 3,000 people for a lot of these small communities, or a lot of on-site systems, national parks, things of that nature, rest stop areas that fit this demographic. And a lot of these systems face similar challenges throughout the US. So these challenges have to do with financial challenges, which is the focus of this talk. We're going to talk a little bit about economic, financial challenges and opportunities. Oftentimes there may be, for example, a state revolving fund available to implement a new technology, but no funds for operation and maintenance. Oftentimes there may not be incentives for utilities to innovate and delve beyond just treatment, going into nutrient, water, and energy recovery. And so part of this talk is how we can address those challenges through improved decision support. There's also technical difficulties. So anecdotally, there's difficulties in training and retaining operators as systems become more regionalized, more centralized. That can increase the level of operator certification, can lead to greater opportunities in larger cities, larger nearby cities, as opposed to these smaller towns where there's really a need for resource recovery, integrated resource recovery. These small communities, whether it's an on-site system, a homeowner, or the mayor of a town that's doubling down as the chief of firefighting and also the wastewater operator, in these very remote, geographically remote areas that may face these challenges of limited managerial capacity. There's also some challenges related to environmental regulations and life cycle environmental impacts. So this was a study done some years ago comparing resource recovery strategies for smaller systems compared to larger systems. And one outcome was that we see higher impacts related to these smaller systems at times. It's important to note, though, that there are many potable water offsets, there's many fertilizer offsets that would decrease the carbon footprint and eutrophication potential of on-site wastewater treatment systems. There's also a whole question that comes into play of mechanized versus passive treatment. But this challenge does represent an opportunity to recognize how we can deal with this trade-off of reducing our carbon footprint and at the same time reducing our eutrophication potential or our nutrient footprint in that scenario, while also attempting to keep costs low. So the Sea Wastewater Decision Support Tool, which I'll just briefly speak about and introduce to you all, the purpose of it is to allow in the decision-making process for utilities to compare up to 3 small wastewater systems. This could be an on-site system ranging all the way up to a system serving 10,000 population equivalents. And it was designed for the Rural Community Assistance Partnership to work with their technical assistance providers to have this user-friendly tool making, accounting for the 3 pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. And so the tool is readily available. It's in a Google Sheet, and it's been made available to the RCAP community. I'd be happy to share my contact information for anybody that's interested in learning more about it. Results for various sustainability metrics, including economic metrics, and recommends a most sustainable alternative using analytic hierarchy process. And that's a multi-criteria decision analysis technique. So of course, cost is important. Cost is the primary factor when evaluating alternatives. However, the tool itself focuses on the 3 pillars: economic, environmental, and social performance. Once feasible alternatives have been identified, the tool is able to use my multi-criteria decision analysis to produce a single score to recommend the system with the lowest impact or the most sustainable system. You may be wondering what the input data is. Here's just a brief snapshot. Basic things like location, some water quality data, information on water reuse and their use of biosolids, info on energy and chemical costs and amounts, as well as some info on costs, infrastructure, etc. And these are the outputs of the tool. So, one of the major outputs is that we're thinking about asset management lifecycle costs in the form of a net present worth. Also affordability. So the cost to customers is very important in these rural communities. And we have carbon footprint, eutrophication potential, water reclaimed, as well as these social and technical factors that are highly correlated to cost, right? The employee the utility has, the higher the cost. Degree of automation is going to impact the number of employees that are on site at any given time, and same with maintenance required. And then of course things like daily and seasonal resilience and system intrusiveness are important in this more holistic picture of the ways in which triple bottom line can affect decisions. some of you may be curious why these particular sustainability metrics. There was a workshop held at the National Science Foundation, I believe it was 2017, in which a group of stakeholders came together to identify metrics that were important for wastewater resource recovery. This included various wastewater professionals from around the country, researchers from universities, regulators, technology innovators, folks from WEF, folks from the Water Research Foundation. And we adopted some of these metrics that were established to look at ones that were most suitable for small systems. And so this kind of gives you a snapshot of what metrics came out of this larger conversation, where it's important to include various stakeholders in order to improve adaptability and implementation and innovation in our wastewater sector. But what came out of this was, a preferred tool that can do life cycle cost analysis, life cycle assessment, looking at environmental impacts, meet regulatory compliance, assess the potential for resource recovery. So looking at those benefits that come from fertilizer offsets and from water offsets and energy offsets, and assess environmental, economic, and technical performance. So I think with that, I'm pretty much done. I have one quick map that I'd like to briefly share in this last minute. So that those sustainability metrics and that work were part of the FAST Water Network, which has been established by the Water Research Foundation. It's a network throughout the world that are doing work on water resource recovery facilities. It's meant to be a place for collaboration and exchange of ideas, identifying different facilities. And the one thing that I just want to note and leave you with is we see a lot of blank space in the southern part of the Americas, right? Mexico and going down into South America. And so there's a lot of work needed on integrated resource recovery in that region, and potential for a lot of collaborations and partnerships.
Thank you, Pablo. That was awesome and right on time. Really appreciate that, and a lot of great material. So we'll come back to you for the conversation for sure. And we're going to move on now to hear from Stacey. Stacey Berahzer is a water project consultant with 19 years of experience. Through IB Environmental, she helps funders, nonprofits, utility companies, and communities fund and manage their water projects so they can make water clean and affordable. She specializes in policy related to water affordability and equity, as well as stormwater and watershed management. She also has a background in Caribbean water issues. Stacey holds degrees in environmental science and public administration. She facilitates the Georgia Funders Forum and chaired the board of the Institute for Georgia Environmental Leadership. I think we'll hear more about the Georgia Funders Forum in a minute here. All right, Stacey, take it away.
Great, thank you, Nadav, and good morning, everyone. I'm assuming my audio is coming through okay?
It is, yes.
Okay, and you can see my screen, right? Yeah. Excellent. All right, thanks. Well, lovely to join you all today. This is the first time I've had an opportunity to be involved with the summit, so very interesting material so far. So as Nadav said, my name is Stacey Berahzer, and I'm the CEO of a small firm called IB Environmental, where we focus on these 4 areas. If I had to put our work into buckets, right, which was always difficult, but really water affordability and equity is where we do most of our work. So we look at the rate structures for water and wastewater and stormwater and figure out in there how you can make this service or these vital services more affordable for the lowest income folks in the community. And you know, it's a little bit of an understatement, but that has been really amplified during the pandemic, and that whole issue of low income folks maybe not being able to afford these critical services. Today, the area that we're going to focus on that does fit into our work is funding sources. So as Nadav said, I facilitate the Georgia Funders Forum as part of our work at IB Environmental. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you a lot about today. We also work with communities and nonprofits, figuring out how they are going to fund their environmental projects, again, mainly around water. We do some electricity and energy affordability work as well. So equity is a big part of the work that we do. And then I do have a background in Caribbean environmental issues, and that's probably maybe a dead giveaway from the accent, but that's
Stacey,
where I grew up.
I'm
Yes?
gonna pause you for just a second. There's a little bit of a garbled sound with your audio that makes it hard for some people to fully understand. It's not terrible. So if there's nothing you can change, I would just say keep going. But if there's
Okay.
anything you can change in your audio setup to get it a little clearer, that would be helpful.
All right, give me 1 moment here. I'm gonna change my setup. Okay. Is this any better, Nadav?
Much better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Sometimes the cheaper corded devices work better than the wireless ones. Or it could be user error, but thanks for that feedback. Okay, so that's a little bit about what the company does. Traditionally, drinking water and wastewater has been a little bit, I would say, easier to fund because they've been around for a long time and they're sort of established funding sources. But when it comes to stormwater and watershed management, that's a little bit more difficult to fund sometimes. So we do some work there as well. But this area here of funding sources is what I'm going to talk to you all most about today. So let's see. All right. So we facilitate this thing called the Georgia Funders Forum, which is really a collection of all of the public entities, so the public programs, federal and state, that have resources for water, wastewater, stormwater projects in the state of Georgia. So basically, once a quarter, these different programs get together. We have about 8 to 10 programs that attend any one of these meetings. It's pretty internal, right? In that it's just the funders. It's almost like a support group for funders. So they are sharing their struggles right now. Maybe they don't have enough applicants. Maybe they've changed their application process, or they want to change their application process. Maybe they want to take it from paper to online, whereas some of the other funders in the group have done that. And so it's a lot of sharing and just updating the other programs on what's happening with your current program, okay? And so that's in a nutshell what we do if we can meet in person, because there's not a pandemic going on. You know, normally we'll bring the muffins and the coffee, and now we have fruit as well for a healthier option, and it's just really informal for the funders to share. So that's how you can get to it. Now, a little bit more about the forum. So this is a picture from one of our actual meetings. You can see we're around a table. We have a presenter came in and talked about a certain topic. So the funders will also tell us like stuff that they want to learn more about. Sometimes it's, I don't really get the environmental review process too well for our state. And sometimes that stops us from being able to fund a project if it doesn't successfully make it through that environmental review process. So can you bring somebody in who can talk about how that works? That's not what this gentleman is talking about, but you know, that just gives you an idea of the types of topics. And then we have a table right here that summarizes the funding sources for a unit trying to get resources for water and sewer. Now, I will say it's mainly public funding sources. So therefore, private entities are not always a straight shot, but I'll talk to you all a little bit, you know, how, if you're a private entity, how you might be able to kind of tap into this. So when you go to that website, it will give you this sort of table. And then if we hone in on just one program here, I think the most important thing is there's contact information here for somebody specifically at that program. So you can contact that person, you can pitch a project idea. He or she might tell you, you know what, call this other row in the table, right? Because we're not a good fit. So that's the kind of the goal behind it. Now, a couple of things here. If you're not in Georgia, you're not out of luck. There are these sort of funding coordination bodies across the country, and we'll show you where to find some of them. But also for this group, y'all are, you know, innovative, technical folks who have, you know, new technology that will solve problems. And if one of these funding sources cannot fund you directly as a private entity, I would really encourage you to work with a local government, publicly owned water, wastewater, stormwater system in your area, and they may be able to access the funding and you would be the contractor, right? So that's, there are ways around this, which I think this is a very typical way that funding gets moved out. So if you're not in Georgia though, you can actually go to this website called SHWI for short, the Small Community Water Infrastructure Exchange. It's a group under the auspices of something called CFA, the Council for Infrastructure Financing Authorities in the country. And you go there, there's a drop-down list. This is a screenshot from the website, and you can pick your state and you will see if there is a funding coordinating body like the Georgia Funders Forum in your state. They look different. Maybe they have public meetings and you can even attend, or maybe they're a closed group, kind of like how we do it in Georgia, but you'll be able to find some information about your state from this one website. And then you can also spend a little time on this Water Finance Clearinghouse from EPA, where you can sort of drill down here and put in the type of project you want, your state, etc., whether you're rural, urban, and kind of see what funding options are available for you. So with that, I think that's my time. Sorry about the technical issue there. And this is how I can be contacted. So I'll hand back to Nadav.
Thank you, Stacey. That was super, really great, practical, useful information for everyone, and look forward to the follow-up. We get into the Q&A. We're going to turn next to Jay. Dr. J.L. Garland joined the EPA's Office of Research and Development in 2011. Dr. Garland received a PhD in environment science from the University of Virginia and spent over 20 years working on NASA's efforts to develop closed bioregenerative life support systems for extended human spaceflight. His current efforts focus on advancing innovative approaches to water infrastructure, including decentralized water reuse and mitigating risks associated with antimicrobial resistance in the water cycle. So Jay.
Thank you. Well, let me share my screen here. Just go to presentation mode here. Sorry. It's covered up by.
Yes. PowerPoint and Zoom don't often work well together, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you got one bar over, hiding the other ones. Let's see. Can you guys see that all right?
We see your screen, but it's not in presentation mode. We see.
Yeah, let me see if I can get the presentation.
There you go. You're right there. Yeah.
There we go. There we go. So thanks. I'm really glad to be here. I've been in contact with the Rich Earth Institute since I got the EPA, and really have always been trying to make more connections, and I hope to do more in the future. What I want to just talk about today is experience over the last, say, 6 or 7 years. It's on decentralized systems and on reuse and resource recovery, mainly focused on water reuse, and mainly kind of in urban settings. And it's really centered around this idea that buildings, produce water, right? I mean, that you can think about it as a problem. They generate all these water streams that you can deal with, but really turn it around and say, listen, these are all sources of water, and there's no reason why buildings can't be net producers of water of various kinds. And there's a lot of this going on around the country. These are some examples from the East Coast on the left to the West Coast on the right. Where buildings are treating the water on site. On the left-hand side, the Solaire building in Battery Park, New York, is one of the oldest buildings around that have been doing this for over almost 2 decades now, where they're recycling water in the basement using a membrane bioreactor, and then reusing that water for toilet flushing, cooling, and irrigation. In the center, that's an example from Portland, Oregon, where they designed kind of more of a biologically based system that involves landscape. Those purple glowing cylinders are the bioreactors made for viewing, and then they use the landscape for a lot of the treatment as well. And then on the right-hand side, you see a new building in San Francisco. San Francisco is requiring all new buildings of a greater than 25,000 square foot to incorporate this kind of non-potable reuse on site. So the focus is on water, and we had the opportunity to kind of look at, kind of work with this group since 2014, they got together a number of basically utilities and public health agencies, both local and state health agencies, got together because there was this increasing interest in these kind of systems, but they really didn't know how to manage it or regulate them, and to make sure that they were being implemented safely and effectively. So this group met initially, the San Francisco Public Utility Commission, Paula Kehoe, who I think has spoken to your group in the past, is the one that led this effort, still leads it, and it evolved into what's now called the Blue Ribbon Commission on Non-Potable On-Site Reuse. So, but what they defined here early on is that, no matter if however you're gonna fund these systems, one of the key roadblocks was making sure that there was effective water quality parameters and monitoring systems in place so that you were protecting public health and therefore could effectively introduce these things. So I'm with the Office of Research and Development within EPA. So we were able to link up with this group and really develop a research program over the last 5 or 6 years around this question of, if you want to take all those different sources of water and treat them for non-potable use, we really looked at these 3 main questions that are on the right-hand side there. I mean, how do you define acceptable treatment first? How do you make sure that you design for safe reuse? And you're talking about a lot of different reuse options here, right? Different sources for different possible end uses. Once you define the treatment, how do you make sure that you can monitor the performance, that your systems are performing as designed? And the third question there is this broader question of, does it make sense? And this gets back into what Pablo was saying about trying to look at more of a system level evaluation of these alternative systems. Say, are you just trading improved water efficiency for a higher cost, as an example? And so on the right-hand side, there's a number of different partners. There was a number of different funding entities that supported this group, but it really, and it's been, like I said, now it's ongoing, and it's this Blue Ribbon Commission. And on the left-hand side there, you see that it kind of represent different scales. It's mainly not building scale, more larger buildings and districts that is really more of the focus. So along those lines, just real briefly touch on those couple of those questions that I've mentioned. To define acceptable treatment, we've usually used, we've applied quantitative microbial risk assessment here because most of the risk is due to acute biological risk, not chemical risk, because you're not drinking the water. So, the idea there is this kind of simple process, relatively simple process. There's a lot of math underneath it, but you need to define what the pathogen loads are in these different, what are the risks in these different streams, understand what the dose response is if you were to use that water untreated, and then you have a predictive risk, and then you define what your tolerable risk is. Usually it's set around 1 in 10,000 infections per person per year, and that's the log reduction target. So the difference is your treatment guidance. So there's a whole matrix of source waters and end uses that we have worked with, and there's a number of different publications if you're interested in any of this, including things from the straight black water all the way to rainwater that's collected off the roof to even the condensate that's generated through AC systems in the buildings too. And obviously the end uses for non-potable, there's less stringent treatment, but still treatment requirements. Then you go all the way to potential potable reuse. Not only are there more stringent removal requirements for the microbial risk, but then you also have to build in chemical risks too. But this approach, I think the point here is that you could apply this to any kind of effective, approaches for on-site reuse. If you're using other streams, whether urine, solids, et cetera, you still need to apply this approach to defining what the risks are. And the goal here really is based on informing treatment guidance, not necessarily thinking about some universal water quality measure at the end, because that can tend to be misleading, because the water quality measures, the fecal indicators we tend to use are what we want, what historically we've used, but it's really misleading because given the diversity of different source waters, those may not be as appropriate and predictive of public health risk. So this approach, and it's really focused more on treatment, and therefore the requirements are more focused on defining the performance of the system and validating that, as opposed to a endpoint water quality measure, and more on then having measures in place to ensure that your system is operating effectively, and that may be very system dependent. For example, membrane bioreactor, it's membrane transmembrane pressure, it could be UV fluence or other kinds of disinfection residuals. Now, this second question real briefly is, I mentioned, you have to avoid burden shifting, right? I mean, you want to look at a more complete picture of the impacts here. So you're not just saying, okay, I'm recycling water and I'm reducing my water footprint, but at what cost, right? So we've also done a number of different system level assessments on different scales of these systems and different treatment approaches. And I want to touch on one real briefly here because I think it particularly interfaces with this group and the interest in urine reuse. And, so you do this whole life cycle assessment. You have to do your inventory. In this case, we were trying to look at the avoided cost of, reducing the centralized building water supply. But it also is important to note that all this treatment inside, right? We're taking this wastewater generator, reusing it for purposes on site. We're reducing the amount of water we need coming in, but we are still using the centralized wastewater treatment plant because all the residues from these systems still go down the drain in essence. So they're decentralized, but only for one aspect, just the water, not the nutrients, as we know we need to move toward originally. And that can come back to bite you a little bit because we looked at a number of different systems here, basically, not to get too far in the weeds, but aerobic MBRs are the common practice. They're everywhere. They're being used now for this application. We also want to look at emerging technology called anaerobic MBRs because they are based on anaerobic treatment. Therefore, they have less cost for sparging and supplying oxygen, but then they also generate biogas that can be used for energy and reduce your energy footprint. We also looked at a green system, plant-based system, but it was a recirculating vertical flow wetland, which is more of a high intensity system than a normal passive kind of system. And we use this because going back to my first slides on risk, there were risk numbers for the removal rates. And that's what these numbers are: virus, parasites, bacteria, what the removal was for these different unit processes and the steps. But anyway, so getting kind of far in the weeds here, but one more kind of slide to show you this. The end product of this is for global climate change for these different options. And what you're looking at here is above zero is the cost of the system. So it's really the operation of the system on site. The things below zero are the avoided cost or the locally generated resources. So the blue here, the dark blue, that's the benefit of avoided drinking water supply, the potable water offset. So it's significant across the board, and it's really equal for all of them because you're reusing. But this red dot is the kind of the net benefit, right? So it's the kind of adds up the cost versus the benefits. And in this case, you want it to be below zero to be a net global warming potential benefit. And what you can see here, what we've mapped in the different colors are the different technologies. The blue is the aerobic MBR. The red is the the red is there's a thermal recovery of energy, which I don't want to get into right now, but you can recover the energy. The point I wanted to make here was with the anaerobic MBRs, you would think that they should have a lower footprint because you're generating energy on site with these, right? That's what the potential is, but it's actually higher cost because if you go back to that previous slide, we had to add in these other treatment processes to remove the reduced nitrogen that's in that stream, because this combined black water flow in the anaerobic systems, you can't rely on combined nitrification, denitrification to remove that nitrogen. So you have to have other forms to do it. So if you would remove the nitrogen first, i.e. with something like urine recycling at building scale, you may improve the effectiveness of some of these more advanced approaches. So that was just to kind of touch briefly on this approach of there is interest in, I'm going to stop sharing here. There is a lot of interest in the urban sector about moving towards alternative systems at a smaller scale. And I think the key is making sure that you can define the safety of them first and look at them holistically to find the overall cost. And as we move forward, we've got to move away from just solely looking at the water recycling. And as I said, bring in really these decentralized systems where you're looking at nutrients, energy, and really begin to think of cities with nodes of wastewater treatment systems, not just water recycling systems. Thanks.
Wow, that was great, Jay. A lot of great material there. Okay, a final speaker on our panel before we go into some questions and discussion is Bruce Douglas. Bruce is the wastewater program manager at the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation's Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. He has 38 years of national and international experience, primarily focused on decentralized wastewater treatment and non-potable water reuse systems, including soil science, hydrology, hydrogeology, design, construction, operation, maintenance, and management. His role in the public sector has been focused on developing and implementing sound regulatory programs for potable water and on-site wastewater infrastructure. So Bruce, it's all yours.
Okay, let's see if I can share my screen. Thank you, Nadav. All right. Are we seeing that screen?
We are.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much. So yeah, really glad to be here. One interesting caveat is I've just recently rejoined the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, and essentially the same group that I worked at in the early 1990s, late 1980s. I came here, interestingly, from Natural Systems Utilities, who you've seen the Solaire system in a number of presentations. So I just want to put in a plug for both the private sector and the public sector have a role to play in these systems. Let's see if I can advance my screen here. There we go. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about kind of the history in Vermont of water reuse, decentralized wastewater management, and our current priorities regarding funding, to provide some context here for people to ask questions and have further discussion. So there's not a lot of on-site wastewater recycling in Vermont, and this timeline kind of parallels a lot of the Northeast, the temperate Northeast, where there's not excuse me, as much of an apparent need for water reuse based on generally sufficient rainfall, excuse me. But we've had some significant droughts lately, and a community near me has been having to truck in water for most of the summer, and they just recently are getting their drinking water supply back online due to drought conditions in northern Vermont. But back in the late 1980s, Killington had originally proposed water reuse for snowmaking, and it wasn't really well received in the press, but they were successful in reclaiming water and utilizing it in some of the residential buildings at the ski area resort. In 2005, the state improved the Share and Rest area and created the Share and Information Center, and also the Vietnam Veterans Memorial site. And as part of that, they developed this living machine they see on the left, which is a wastewater treatment plant utilizing biological processes and living organisms. And you can walk around the balcony of that greenhouse and look down and see the various processes with nice little guide signs. And that's still functioning. And its scale is probably, between a few thousand on a quiet weekday to maybe 10 or 20,000 gallons per day coming through that on a busy weekend. And then there was also an attempt at a living machine at the Aiken building was installed actually at the University of Vermont, but it as last I heard, is not operational because the operator left. It sort of dependent on graduate student interest and contribution to it. So it was an interior, just a system that did some polishing before discharging to the city sewer system in Burlington, Vermont. There we go. So give a little timeline, a little bit of perspective here. And I know that the term distributed or decentralized wastewater has been used quite a bit. So what happened in Vermont, there were some changes in the 1980s where kind of the oversight of on-site wastewater and water supply rules were consolidated at the Department of Environmental Conservation, but also uniquely the indirect discharge program was established. And the legislature said that systems greater than 6,500 gallons per day shall have no significant impact on aquatic biota. So basically all large systems that whether they discharge the soil, the groundwater to a stream, they have to meet this criteria. And it's one of the highest, most stringent nutrient really criteria, but also looking at the biota, the biology of the receiving waters as part of the program. So in the 1990s, there was a number of decentralized wastewater feasibility studies that were funded by the state, and then the US EPA stepped in and funded the Warren Village project, which ended up having a large system that disposing of septic tank effluent at a ball field at a school, serving the whole village. And the process, though, what made that interesting, the process was looking at all options. So the way it came about is not saying we're going to sewer the whole village, but say where's the need within the village that does not have the capacity on site, and we're just going to focus on that to contain costs. There's also during the 1990s innovative alternative treatment technology came about. Primarily was initially recirculating sand filters and intermittent sand filters. That has evolved to have many technologies for small-scale wastewater treatment to overcome site limitations. Then in the 2000s, there were a number of decentralized wastewater and water projects, primarily focused at the community and village level. And one in the town of Colchester, right on Lake Champlain, extensive evaluation of the need for sewering from at the time it was the 5th largest population community in Vermont, and mostly unsewered, and still is mostly unsewered. Also, an on-site wastewater training center was established at Vermont Technical College. And unfortunately, it's no longer, the center is not active. Vermont Technical College are still doing on-site wastewater training. They just haven't kept up the facilities to use it as a demonstration test site and training site on technologies. They've more focused on training licensed designers. And the Department of Environmental Conservation took over jurisdiction for potable water supply wastewater permitting statewide in the 2000s. But it's really interesting. I want to focus, it ties a lot of what you've been seeing together is the Vermont Villages Solutions Initiative that's occurred. It's beginning in 2010. And it's the collaboration between various divisions, environmental conservation, or environmental assistance and outreach, financial folks, surface water management and drinking water and groundwater protection, as well as the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So basically bringing that community development aspect together.
Oh, looks like we might have lost Bruce there. Give him a minute, see if he comes back. Okay, well, while Bruce is hopefully getting reconnected, I'm going to shift into the Q&A part with your other three panelists, and then we'll have Bruce finish up when we get him back online. Yeah, it looks like we lost him entirely. So hopefully he'll reconnect and be back with us. Well, it's too bad. That was just rolling through well. So yeah, I've got a few questions for the panelists. We'll start with those and then open it up, as I said, to the rest of you for questions. And Pablo, I want to start with you, and I want to focus in on the stakeholder involvement piece of your work. And I want to know if you could speak a little bit to the importance of stakeholder involvement in terms of long-term sustainability of innovative resource recovery strategies. You're muted, Pablo. I need to unmute your on Zoom. There you go.
Okay, I was
Much better, thank you.
I was trying to call in by phone, but this will work. So yeah, in terms of stakeholder involvement, I think all of the speakers really alluded to the fact that collaboration is necessary, especially in this, you know, innovative space of we tend to be in an industry that's resistant to change. And so it's important to have regulators and engineers and researchers and nonprofits all in the same room communicating about the best way that we can push technologies forward because of that resistance to change. And so I think, you know, that was part of the initial effort with the fast water network. I think that there's a need for it for on-site and small systems. The fast water network in many ways was focused on larger systems, but also smaller systems. But I think that that's an important step in identifying who are those potential collaborators, who are those stakeholders to really push that innovation and move the process forward, right? In a way that's not going to have various barriers.
Super, thanks for that. Stacey, I want to ask you about
while you're thinking, I'll just jump into and back, but you go ahead with the questions.
I think we lost
we got you, and I think we lost him.
Yeah. Only one of you can be in here at a time, apparently.
Vermont's not big enough for the both of us.
Yeah.
Bruce, I'm going to suggest maybe you can. Oh, Nadav. No, Nadav is still stuck. Bruce, why don't you go ahead and continue, and we'll figure it out when Nadav comes back.
Okay, great. I'll share screen here. All right, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Can you see my slides? All right, great. So basically, Vermont villages are seen to be a priority because that's the historic population growth pattern, and it's a better use of the landscape and keep the forest and fields rural, but allow people to be close together and very, it's efficient from a land use and energy standpoint. So there was a guidebook developed with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and the Agency of Natural Resources in 2008. Then the governor in 2018 made it part of a strategic plan. The Climate Action Plan established, emphasized community wastewater disposal and water supply systems as being climate positive. And there was a northern borders, not borders, no A in there, regional commission for states along the northern U.S. Got a grant to help fund this. And so there's a strategic plan set up, and there's been a real focus on villages. And then, so what we, let's see if I can advance this. There we go. we got the American Rescue Plan Act showed up earlier this year, and the Vermont legislature has more money available. But initially for this year, they've put $8 million in water and wastewater infrastructure for villages, $3.5 million in mobile home parks. And back to Pablo's comment about if you are people disadvantaged folks, it's a really significant housing resource for people, low-income people in Vermont. It's also very vulnerable to climate change due to potential flooding. And individual on-site water and wastewater systems also have funding. And interestingly enough, but none of these preclude innovative alternative technologies. The on-site system already has, within our structure, working with Richard Institute, a innovative alternative approval for urine diverting systems, so that they would qualify if the applicant met the financial and
Uh-oh, well, I'm back and now we've lost Bruce again. Is that what's going on? Are we sharing a very thin straw to the internet from Vermont?
Yeah,
here?
I think Stacey was right. You can't both inhabit the same time-space continuum, but hopefully that's only temporary.
Okay, I missed that comment. Oh, Bruce, are you back?
I hope I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now. Got it.
Okay, I'm gonna leave my video off for the moment.
Okay, and Bruce, feel free to dial into the Zoom call if you know how to do that, in case that helps you stay connected for the Q&A. But thank you for that, for the talk. Sorry, we're too bad it was interrupted partway through, but I think we got all that great material, so really appreciate that. Okay, so let's pick up with the Q&A where I was trying to go and when I got cut off with Stacey. And how can we get away from an emphasis on shovel-ready projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, on the public side of financing, when there's a stimulus package or some sort of assistance package like we saw in 2009 and that we're seeing kind of making their way through Congress right now, there is a focus on getting the money out into the economy as quickly as possible, right? And that's logical. But there might also be some openness to new approaches. To be perfectly honest, I mean, I think that it's going to be a challenge to get the money out of the door, the type of funding levels we're seeing. And I'll give you an example with the state revolving fund program that each state has. And I don't know, I'm guessing this is not, top of the mind to the folks on this call, but each state gets a pot of money from the federal government through the EPA to do low interest loans, mainly to water utilities, wastewater utilities, stormwater utilities within that state, and the state has to, chip in 20% sort of as a match. But then these loans go out. With this one program, it's going to be a vehicle for some of this additional funding, and it's, there are rumors that it will triple the budget for the state revolving programs or SRFs in each state. If that happens, it's going to be a challenge for some of the states to get that money out the door. So they'll be open. They're hungry for new ideas. Some states with the SRF programs will fund private entities, but a lot of them focus more on the publicly owned utilities. And so, again, partnering with those utilities, going to picking out a good pilot, like I think Bruce was just talking about, and working with them, offering your services, having them as a model or a pilot to show that there's some proof that it's working, would be the way to go. And there's still some time, I think, to get those off the ground. And then as the states or the federal government are hungry for ideas, you can help that local government prove that, you've had certain tests done, et cetera. So that's what I think would be the best way to sort of get in line quickly and sort of navigate this shovel readiness. Right now, the shovel readiness, it's a big problem in terms of equity. I think, other speakers mentioned this too. The smallest communities with the lowest resources are not the ones who are going to be able to get those applications quickly in the door so that these projects could be funded. They're not the best place to find shovel-ready projects initially. So maybe when you look for a good pilot, focus on some of those smaller utilities where you could help build capacity and help them with their application, to be honest, for some of these federal funds so that they'll be more competitive.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Stacey. A lot of great information there. So I'm going to start with Jay on this one around obstacles. What are the key obstacles? Well, actually, let me back up for a minute. And we talked about this yesterday. We've got productive sanitation as this term in the title of our talk. And we haven't really defined what we mean by that yet. So Jay, do you have a quick stab at just a working definition of what do we mean when we use the term productive sanitation? And then we'll go from there.
Well, I guess there's probably others that probably have a more ready answer for that. But I mean, my focus would be on kind of what I talked about with the water reuse. Productive sanitation really needs to take a system level approach on evaluating everything. So we really need to look at the totality of the processing so that you're not just being too focused on one versus the other and therefore just trading and avoiding and transferring costs somewhere else because you're not really looking at it holistically. And I'm the first to say that the work that we've done here that I talked about was, probably overly focused on water reuse, right? But it's a transitional, we live in a transitional period, right? We're trying to incorporate this and build more towards that totality.
Oh, that's great. So before I come back to you with the next question, let's do just a real quick with the rest of the panelists. Stacey, do you have a working definition for concept of productive sanitation?
I like Jay's. I'll go with that.
All right. And Pablo?
To me, it seems almost synonymous with, integrated resource recovery and, addressing issues of the food, water, energy nexus.
Great. And Bruce, are you with us? Don't see your image now, but hopefully we can hear you.
Yeah, no, I'm here, and I ditto. I agree. I think the concepts, and part of it is in the concept of what's appropriate for your community, your watershed. I mean, to be productive, it's got to be something that can be supported. It's not. Yes, we want to share all the resources, but we want to make sure we have local ownership and capacity to implement it.
Great. Cool. That was great. Okay. So Jay, back to you now with what are some key obstacles for productive use of urine, which funding, which really needs some funding to most effectively address?
Well, I think one thing I'd like to return to, Pablo made a comment earlier about this idea of collaboration. I think almost any answer to these questions about what the obstacles are or where the funding should be needs to emphasize the collaboration, right? I mean, because when I think about what the obstacles are, this working group that I've been involved with the Blue Ribbon Commission, the collaboration between the research and the implementers, right? It was the utilities, public health regulators, and our research, the direct working together on these issues. I can't speak highly enough about that, right? I go to their meetings twice a year, and I always tell them, hey, listen, you guys complete me, right? Because it's the research that has some end result, and it's much more effectively implemented by that collaboration. So your question about obstacles, I think it relates partly to that. We need to have these collaborative units, and we need to, I think we need more funding and opportunities for systems, for pilot systems, right? We need to really look at their operation from both an implementation side and from a research side, so we can better understand them, we can get better experience with them, and we can define better regulations, et cetera. But we need to make sure that they're not happening independently, or these obstacles will continue just to persist because we're not looking at them collaboratively. And I know that's kind of just, mom and apple pie stuff, right? But I think it can't be said enough.
That's great. Thank you. So Bruce, I want to see if you have a follow-up on that, both from the funding, opportunities and obstacles, and maybe something on that collaboration.
Sure. Well, I find it's not just the technology as that's the solution. It's the whole management system that we're
Bruce, can you turn off your video and see if we can hear you better that way?
Sometimes it is a technology.
How's that? Is that better? Can you hear
Sounds
me
better
okay?
for now. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Thanks. So basically you've got a concept of risk in funding. When people want to either invest money, either from a state or federal program, they're looking at risk, and as well as the people that the end users trust or entrust into their project design, which are the engineers. And you've got to make sure you're mitigating the risk in view of the people that are making these key decisions. I mean, because the community may want something that's very progressive and very innovative, but they got to make sure that they have a an engineering consultant, and that they have enough documentation and backup and assessment of that risk to show that to the lender or the grantor, or the voters who are going to vote at a bond vote, that this is something that is a relatively acceptable risk.
Great. So we need to think about that in terms of risk. Yeah. So I also aware there's been some great questions and answers going on in the chat. So I don't know that I need to re-ask questions that were posed there, because it seems like they've been mostly responded to in the chat. But maybe Nancy, there's been some follow-up on your question. Your suggestion, I guess it's a suggestion really, around this idea of identifying mixed-use communities where the systems could be tested out on a larger scale beyond the building scale. Do you want to elaborate on that? And do you have a question for the panelists to follow up with on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this has been a great panel, and I think it's really been more of a comment. Lynn also followed up. And it gets to Jay and others' points about the need for a diverse group of individuals coming together. But when I talk to the water utility folks, and the notion of how we justify the source separation, the offsets needed, that I'm increasingly seeing this notion of needing to, and even business people who are entrepreneurs, the need to have the demonstration beyond a building scale, but at kind of a more contained community scale, and have a few of those really great examples that work. And then you get the builders and the developers and others to start paying attention. So I think it's the same thing that several of you are talking about, some of these examples, but how do we spread that? I think with this kind of diverse community, and Lynn and I've talked before about doing a wing spread foundation or something like that kind of initiative to pull these people together, and maybe this can motivate something like that.
Great. Yeah, any of the panelists that want to follow up on that suggestion at all?
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, that with the collaborative approach and making it visible, and I also want to kind of build in what Bruce mentioned about acceptable risk. I mean, that's an interesting issue, because the risk model. I agree, Bruce, that if you don't want to implement something and have people get sick, and it's really kind of then pushes things backwards, right? But a lot of time we build the models, and there's a lot of uncertainty in these models, risk models that I mentioned, any of them, especially when it comes to innovative technologies. We build them around a 1 in 10,000 people getting sick per year from that. I mean, so when you're talking about these small scales, there's not even 10,000 people in the building, or even in the neighborhood, right? Or in the district that you're talking about. So it may be hard to pick up that risk. You may be above the 1 in 10,000, but it really may not be able to point towards that thing that you're doing, that new thing you're doing, as the source of that. And it may just kind of be in the background anyway. But I think it's a good public health approach to have those stringent goals. But my point is that sometimes you don't even, it'll be hard to pick it up, especially in these small scale systems. And that's why we move to these risk models as opposed to doing epidemiological work, because you got to sample so many people and it's so expensive, you really just you can't do it anymore. So the point is, I agree, Bruce, we need to make sure that they're not very risky systems. But I think if using the present approaches we could easily get probably err on the conservative side, which is probably what you want to do. But the key then is really being able to implement it so you can understand how these things work and all the co-benefits and the unintended consequences of the systems, and also how well they actually perform. And that's a real key aspect to really evaluating them. You got to get by that risk thing first, but I think we look at risk maybe a little bit too narrowly, right? When you're talking about the broader impacts.
Yeah, Bruce, anything follow up on the risk conversation?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that's fundamental, and I think I'm really glad to see that the decentralized non-potable reuse and even the potable reuse is really looking at risk. I think there's been a gap at looking at risk at decentralized wastewater management, and I mean, with the exception, the Rich Earth Institute is tackling that aspect of it. But and the collaborators, the different researchers that are many on this call who are doing work on that level. But I think what also comes is this concept of, even if you can scientifically address the risk, often people will look at trusted members of their community saying, does this make sense for us? And they'll look at a wastewater treatment plant operator who doesn't understand the technology, just said, oh, I'm not comfortable with it because they're not trained. So the point I want to make is capacity development has to go along with all these great scientific analyses, and making sure that we have trained operators and service providers and designers build that capacity up that's in parallel. So we have the trusted resources in the communities being able to say, yes, that acceptable risk is something that I can implement for you.
So there's real risk and then perceived risk in the eyes of those trusted parties, right? And you guys are focused on health risks, but there are probably other risks, systems, you can have technology failures, other things that could be expensive, even if they're not.
If I could
Yes,
just
please.
briefly add to this, since you brought up, perceived versus acceptable risk, is the importance of anthropologists as a part of this stakeholder group, or people that are bringing in an understanding of the sociocultural aspects that are leading to the yuck factor, or that are leading to perceptions that, for example, a potable reuse project that's treating water to a higher level than a regular drinking water treatment plant is more dangerous for some reason. I think we have in many ways, we have some of the technologies in place to do it safely. Of course, it's important to look at the microbial risk, but sometimes it's the public perception hurdles and the social technical hurdles that outside of engineering, we can tap into other fields to better understand that public perception piece that's important to the success or failure of the systems.
That's great, Pablo. Yeah, and Stacey, how about you from your perspective with the funders? How has risk or with innovative systems managed, perceived, dealt with?
Yeah, so again, on the public funding side, it's a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. So I'll give you an example. Let me step back for a second. I wanted to make a comment about the collaboration, so that folks should know that there are memos of agreement between federal agencies like the EPA and the USDA that they are going to collaborate on water projects, right? So if you can help them get a good example where they can, check or bean count that they have done some collaboration, that's helpful. I mean, it takes a while, but that's one thing on the sort of collaboration piece. And then I wanted to say too, with some of these other comments here, getting consumers involved is important. Y'all might call them consumers, I call them ratepayers, right? If they bought into the idea or the technology, they're the ones paying the bills. So I have a chart that I can bring up if we have time later on. Federal spending on water and wastewater and stormwater has been pretty low and steady, has leveled out over the last couple decades. But really the local governments, and state, but mainly local, is where the chart has been, going up to pay for the infrastructure gap in this country in the general water industry. So And that's coming from the local ratepayers. That's coming from the consumers. So it's a big group to reach out to, but it's an important group because they are actually paying for a lot of the infrastructure at this point, and I don't see a big difference with that in the future. So in terms of the risk for federal entities, they use the word innovative a lot, but you have to bring them along. And I'll give you an example. In 2009, there was there was a green project reserve in the state revolving fund, and each state had to spend some of the money that they were getting on green projects, and they can give the money away for free, if you will, if it was green. And so toilet rebate programs were on there. And when it came to actually implementing a toilet rebate program, it hadn't really been done through the state revolving fund before. So I know working with one community in particular, they figured it out. It was a lot of red tape, it was a lot of hurdles. So on the one hand, the federal government is telling us this is an eligible project. But when we start asking, well, how do we prove that, the consumer bought the toilet, and how do we handle the receipts and all that? I will say that this local government utility had to figure out all of those barriers and hurdles, and they made it work. And in the end, then you get an award, right? When you've gone through all that red tape, because it was innovative, you pulled collaborators in and you made it happen. So if you're willing to stick with the process and be the trailblazer, then you end up as case studies at the end for this great type of project, and how it was green in this case, right? But there's a lot of fighting sometimes and headache involved, but it's worth it to stick with the process. So the risk, we said it was an eligible project to do toilet rebates, but we didn't really know how it was going to work. And they need a utility, a company working with them to help them figure out all of the barriers and get through the red tape. And then you become a case study and an example for other communities who want to do that type of project.
Super. Thank you, Stacey. So we have just a few minutes left. In terms of this, this focus on funding and funding sources, and now we've tied in this, this key area of collaboration, and there's more dialogue going on in the chat about that opportunity and how risk plays into that. Is there like an overall model or a model for an overall funding strategy on how to transform productive sanitation from sort of those one-off innovation projects to a more mainstream thing? Bruce, do you have any thoughts about that first? And if you could be brief, we'll give everyone a chance to go on this. Yeah.
Right. I'll just really briefly, the decentralized wastewater management model is a good one to start with. They initially worked fairly locally in Massachusetts, but developed a framework for decentralized wastewater management. What's the big picture, what they wanted to do? And they were able to take that to Congress and get funding for a consortium of universities and higher education institutions around the country that can allocate the money to cover all those bases, but minimize the competition and maximize the collaboration. And that's a really great investment of funds that's a model that could be replicated with productive sanitation.
Oh, great. Thanks. And Pablo, how about you? Is there a model for funding this kind of thing that you see?
I think, as I was mentioning before, and very in line with what Bruce was saying, is as an extension of that initial workshop that was held to identify sustainability metrics within the Fast Water Network, something similar to that, focused on on-site systems where you have various agencies with funds that are at the table, whether that be the DOE, EPA, NSF, in addition to consultants interested in this and researchers, and obviously technology innovators. And so that again, that collaboration piece, just I'll echo the same thing that Bruce said, and building on that model of decentralized wastewater management seems to be essential. I'll say it's not easy, but I think it's necessary.
Great. Thanks, Pablo. And Jay, how about you?
I'm not sure I've seen a good model for this. I mean, I know based on what we were talking about before, the collaboration that we've been involved with, it's been really kind of clearing out some of the initial roadblocks. But to me, there really is a need for accelerated demonstration projects. And that can really kind of link the science and the implementation and the community. And I haven't really, I don't know, maybe some of our colleagues from Europe can may have better examples, but I can't think of a lot here in the States. But I sure as hell would like to be part of that.
Awesome. I'm sure people would love to have you part of it too. All right. Stacey, please, do you have any thoughts on this? Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly. So I think this is a good time because there seems like there's going to be a lot of money in this area of water infrastructure right now. And so if you have some technology, I think this is the time to get together with some partners, like we've been saying, and really create a good case study or pilot that can go viral and can scale up. So align with your partners and let's see what happens from there.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't, in my role as chair of the board at Rich Earth, and since this is a session about funding, I just have to mention Rich Earth, of course, needs funding for all the amazing work they're doing. So if you haven't already, or if you haven't recently, there's a donate button on the Rich Earth website, makes it very easy. Or if you're connected to a program that might have, a funding stream of some kind that Rich Earth should know about, please reach out directly to Ivan, our executive director, and be in touch, because as you all know, and as we've just been talking about, this is a multifaceted challenge, and Rich Earth is really attacking it on multiple fronts: the social, the basic research, the technology development, and it's a lot of work. So really appreciate, I know everybody in this summit and in this meeting is at the center of all of that and attacking this from multiple sides. So it's so great when we can get together and share and identify ways to collaborate to advance this better. So can we have a round of applause for these panelists? You can do the Zoom hands or the pick up your hands, but what a great sharing of lessons and ideas and thoughts. And thank you all, Stacey, Pablo, Jay, and Bruce, very much for giving your time and for focusing on this important issue.